So the next topic is how we can have code-based design converted into performance-based design, how this transition happened actually. And then in the next session, we will discuss about what the idea of performance-based design is actually and what are some of the elements in that. The very first question we should ask about the building codes is that are all building codes correct? If they differ, can all of them be correct? Because we have different clauses or factors or different coefficients in different building codes for the same structures. So if they differ, can they all be correct? Do we inform the structures to follow which code when earthquake or hurricane strikes? Codes change after every 3 to 5 years. Should we also upgrade our structures every 3 to 5 years to conform to the new codes? And codes intend for life safety and not damage limits for cost implications. For example, if the structure is significantly damaged in terms of non-structural elements, but the structure itself conforms to the life safety requirement, which is the original intention behind the building codes, will it still be acceptable or not? So these are all the questions which we have about following the building codes. In sometimes, especially in the underdeveloped or developing countries, they follow different building codes. The practice basically is mostly governed by more than one codes. So there is no consensus about which code to follow. So in this case, these questions become more, you can say, meaningful or significant. That what we should do about these codes. The prescriptive building codes, they behave like a shelter because public is concerned only with one question, that will the building be safe? And the owner, for example, of a particular building will have a very specific questions, and those questions will be related to the performance of the building and not about what analysis procedure is being used and what code provisions are being followed. So his question will be very performance oriented. For example, will the building collapse? Will it be damaged in case of a future earthquake? Or if the that much level of an earthquake comes tomorrow, will my building be able to survive? How much repair cost will be required in case of that much level of an earthquake? And how much time will it take to repair? Can I make a building that will not be damaged and will not be collapsed by a particular earthquake? The structural engineers, on the other hand, cannot answer these questions explicitly. All they can say is that we are not sure, but I did follow the code. So that's why the code serves as a shelter for structural designers, and they use it not to answer the explicit questions of the building owners, but just to safeguard themselves or to use it as a shelter. So as long as engineers follow the code, they can be sheltered by its provisions. The building codes implicitly ensures that the performance of the structure will be acceptable if its rules are followed. The performance may not be acceptable in certain cases. After every big earthquake, we have known that there are certain things which building codes may miss out, or there may be certain aspects in which building codes have certain limitations. The actual performance of the building during the real earthquakes have shown us that there can be several limitations from the part of building code. So what we do is that after every such realization, we end up in changing the rules every 3 years based on our updated understanding, or we invent new rules to follow in the updated versions of the building codes, and this process continues with increase in our understanding of these structures. Here I can give you a very interesting example of from a movie called The Towering Inferno, a very old movie by the way. And in that movie, what happens is that there is a high-rise building on fire, and the question was that how long do we have before the building will collapse in this fire? So they show in the movie that what actually happens is that they call the chief engineer or the chief structural engineer or architect. They ask this question. What he do is that he performs some calculations. They show him doing all the calculations and drawings and everything. And at the end, he tells them that you have just 2 hours uh, before the building will collapse in this fire. Um, this movie is 1974. This shows that the public expectation from structural designers or engineers in 1974 was that they should be able to tell how much time a certain building on fire is going to collapse, how much time it will take to collapse. But up till now, we know already that modeling the actual structure under fire and predicting the remaining life of the structure is very complex, still very complex for us. So this example shows the difference between what the public expectation is and what we structural engineers can answer. Similar is the case in case of structural performance kind of questions, that the public at large asks questions directly related to the structural performance. And all we can say now for following the building codes is that we have followed the requirements and the building is code compliant. Some of the shortcomings which we can highlight now, and they are mostly related to the design of tall buildings. For example, most of the traditional building codes, uh, they govern the design of normal buildings. For example, low-rise and mid-rise buildings. They are not specifically uh, developed for high-rise buildings, and they are prescriptive in nature. The structural systems are limited which you can use. I will explain this point in a moment. And it is based on the elastic method of analysis, which is not realistic. We know already that the structures behave inelastically. The real behavior is non-linear. But the code methods are based on elastic methods only. And they enforce uniform detailing rules or requirements, um, the unreasonable demand distribution rules, for example, and they do not take advantage of the recent computing tools. Even if the nonlinear modeling or inelastic analysis has become very easy nowadays, the methods are still based on elastic analysis. To give you an example, that for example, if we have these traditional structural systems for high-rise buildings, we have moment resisting frames, and we have the shear wall and frame interacting systems, the coupled system and the braced frame system. These are all the traditional systems for high-rise buildings. Just compare them now with the innovative new kind of structural systems. Nowadays we have kind of tubular systems, diagrid system with no columns. We have innovative shapes, and we have different vertically irregular structures or with significant setbacks. We have shell structures. We also have structures which are connected at different story levels. These are all new information and new structural systems which are being used for high-rise buildings around the globe. The traditional building codes are not intended for these kind of structures, and we have no option but to use latest inelastic analysis based procedures, for example, performance-based seismic design procedure for structures like this. So a move towards performance-based approach is basically guided by all of these facts, that the prescriptive codes restrict and discourage innovation, but the performance-based approach encourages and liberates. It provides us an alternate solution for the same set of requirements and for the same set of objectives. So instead of prescriptive solution, we have an alternate solution where we are free to use inelastic analysis, we are free to use our own understanding or real simulation which is showing the behavior of your real structure. So the lack of explicit performance in design codes is one of the primary motivations for performance-based design, and it can be used to identify unsafe design. You should be able to tell how the building is likely to perform in extreme events. It enables you to lift the arbitrary restrictions of building codes and provides scope for the development of innovative, safe, and more cost-effective solutions. So you don't need to follow the cookbook type code-based methods or provisions in order to perform the performance-based assessment. So the building owners, they began to question how their buildings would perform in future earthquakes. So the primary requirement from building owners is the structural performance. They express their desire mostly in terms of a series of performance objectives. So this is now the first term related to performance based design, performance objectives. These are the objectives which are set by mostly by building owners and public at large, which should be met by structural designers. And they can be descriptive in nature. For example, I want my existing building to be safe at such level of earthquake. I want to be able to use my building right away after an earthquake. I want the repair cost to be less than 20% of the replacement value. I mean, this can be one of the requirements or performance objectives set by the building owner or owner's engineer, for example. So the performance-based design explicitly answers these questions. An approach in which the structural design criteria are expressed in terms of achieving a set of performance objectives or levels, not in terms of complying to the letter of the code, but in terms of achieving a set of performance objectives or levels, and it it doesn't care what method you used or what modeling technique or what provisions or limits or rules you used. The ultimate thing is the structural performance. If the structural performance becomes your primary design objective, the desired structural performance agreed upon structural performance becomes your primary design objective, then the approach will be called as performance based design. So instead of going towards step-by-step procedure or following certain rules and clauses which implicitly ensures performance, here in this approach you explicitly link the performance with earthquake hazard. For example, if the owner asks that how much damage I am going to have in case of this much level of an earthquake, you actually apply that earthquake to a nonlinear computer model sophisticated enough to capture all the damages expected during that earthquake. And that nonlinear model will actually tell you what actual damage you are going to have, and then you will be in a position to answer explicitly that question of the building owner or any other stakeholder. So this approach ensures that structures specified demand level in both service and strength design level. So the assessment is performed at two levels. One is called the service level evaluation and the other is called the maximum considered earthquake level. So the safety insurance, explicit safety insurance as well as explicit serviceability insurance, that also you will get as a result of this detailed performance based approach. So why it is needed, we have already discussed that traditional codes are not suitable or adequate for some of the structures, and explicit verification is not there of the performance in some of the building codes. And people doesn't care about the code or theories or procedure, they care about safety and performance. So we should be able to explicitly answer questions asked from us about the structural performance. And only the nonlinear analysis and nonlinear computer modeling will be able to give us the answers or give us some of the clues about structural behavior. So the essence of PBD in one line will be: a decision maker states a desire that a building will be able to perform in a certain way. A decision maker can be a building owner, can be, for example, government authority, or can be any other stakeholder that states a desire that the building should be able to perform in a certain way. So that decision maker should be able to set the performance objective. They can be, for example, protect life safety, minimize potential repair cost, minimize disruption of use, for example, in case of an earthquake. The engineer uses his or her skill to provide a design that will be capable of achieving these objectives. That's all. This is what PBD is in one line, that the performance is all the designer should be worried about. And how he can ensure this? By using nonlinear analysis, by going beyond the code, and by using those procedures which the code writers may not indent for common buildings. He should be able to perform nonlinear analysis, he should be able to do nonlinear modeling also. So to give you an example of what a prescriptive approach and what a performance approach is, that a prescriptive approach will emphasize on procedures. For example, it will say that you can have a concrete mix of 1:2:4 in order to achieve a strength of 21 megapascal. I mean, you just mix it in these proportions and it is expected that you will get this 21 megapascal. On the other hand, the performance-based approach is have an emphasis on key performance indicators. For example, it will simply say that the concrete less than 21 megapascal is simply rejected. It doesn't bound you how you should be able to get that 21 megapascal. That 21 megapascal is all what is required. It will not give you a cookbook type recipe to get that strength. Same is in structural design also. That for example, a performance objective is set, and that objective is a combination of two things. First, a hazard level, that a ground motion with some probability of exceedance in 50 years or some years, for example 2% in 50 years or 10% in 50 years, some definition of ground motion, plus the expected performance at that ground motion. So a performance level is the maximum acceptable damage given that this ground motion occurs. So for example, if I say that I want only my non-structural elements to crack in case of this level of an earthquake, for example, 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years. The only damage which I am going to you can say accept is the cracking in non-structural walls. Now this statement becomes your performance objective. You will give this statement to structural designer, and he should be able to ensure using performance based approach that this statement, this performance objective is met. So there are some standard performance levels also which are used in the context of performance based design approach, and they are also defined descriptively in different standards also. So for example, the very first performance level is operational, immediate occupancy, life safety, and collapse prevention. So you can say these are the four standard performance levels which can be used to have a meaningful discussion with the decision maker or the primary stakeholder, maybe owner of the building. Operational means that your structure is not going to have any you can say damage, or it will remain exactly intact after an earthquake. Immediate occupancy means that it will have some damage, maybe some minor damage, but it will be able you will be able to occupy it immediately after an earthquake. So this will become immediate occupancy, which means almost no damage. Life safety means that there can be some damage, but there will be no loss of life. And then collapse prevention means that there can be significant damage, but the structure as a whole should not collapse. It should still remain standing. And then these four performance levels are widely used nowadays to describe different, you can say, performances of a structure under different loads. So for example, you can the owner can say you that okay, at 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years, this level of earthquake, I want this performance level. But at 2% probability of exceedance, which means for a very low probability earthquake, a very rare event, 2% probability of exceedance in 50 years, I may allow this one. I mean, this one is still acceptable in case of a very rare earthquake. But for a 10% probability of exceedance, I need this one. So this will become the performance objective. Definition of a hazard level and the description of the damage, the performance level. So this combined will become the performance objective. So operational level means negligible damage, almost no damage, utilities are available, the loss is less than 5% of the replacement value. So this is the description of what the operational level means. Similarly, this is the description of what the immediate occupancy means, that the structural levels still should be negligible and there can be minor non-structural damage. Similarly, life safety can have significant structural damage. Someone can be injured, but the structure should be overall safe. The building not safe for reoccupancy until repaired. So there will be some repair required in this life safety level. And then the collapse prevention level is this one, that extensive damage can be allowed, but the structure as a whole should not be catastrophically collapsed. By the way, this life safety level is the intention behind the code based design. The codes as a whole basically are based on the idea of public life safety, that their intention is that no loss of life should be permitted or allowed as part of the design philosophy, or no significant or extensive damage should be allowed. But in some cases, for example, in 2011 Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand, we have this example where the life safety level intention of building codes uh, failed significantly in terms that, for example, most of the buildings were at life safety level, but they had significant non-structural damage as intended by this approach. And the buildings, because of that non-structural damage, remained uninhabited, or they were not functional, and there was significant, you can say, repair time or repair cost. So the intended function of the building was lost after this earthquake. So, but they were still at life safety level. So these kind of real earthquake structural performances, they give us an idea what is further required or how we should further improve our understanding of structural behavior and safety. So the first generation of performance-based design methodology, they were mostly based on the nonlinear static analysis procedures. We also call them pushover analysis procedures because nonlinear dynamic analysis some 20 years ago or 25 years ago was not that common. The computational power required to perform a detailed nonlinear dynamic analysis was not mostly available. So the performance-based methodology at that time was using nonlinear static analysis or pushover analysis. In fact, the example of overlaying the demand to the capacity earlier given in these slides was also based on the idea that we can push the structure laterally to get the nonlinear capacity of the structure in the form of what we call as the pushover curve, the relationship between the lateral base shear and the roof displacement. But nowadays, the next generation of performance-based design is explicitly based on the nonlinear dynamic analysis, what we call as the nonlinear response history analysis, or also known as the nonlinear time history analysis. So that is now at the very core of performance-based design methodology. So we have now these four standard performance levels: operational, immediate occupancy, life safety, and collapse prevention. Once we have the structural damage classified under these four categories, we can also relate that damage to any other loss. For example, economic loss, repair cost, for example. We can also relate it with the, for example, consequences of this much damage. Some other, for example, parameters in terms of, for example, downtime, how much repair time will be required and the facility will be shut down. For example, if we take the hazard measure or the loading severity on y-axis and the structural displacements or deformations on x-axis, we can also put these performance levels on this curve also. If you are operational, which means that you are somewhere in the straight line region, but you have some minor damage, maybe non-structural damage only, then you can have somewhere here where there is some degradation in the stiffness of the structure. But if you are at the life safety level, which means that the significant damage have already started, and if you are at collapse prevention, which means that you are just at the verge of complete collapse of the structure. So which means that these four performance levels, they can also be related to the, you can say, the demand side of the analysis. You can say that the demand and capacity, they all can be related to these four performance levels. So for example, if I say collapse prevention of the structure, you should know clearly that you are somewhere towards the end of your force deformation behavior or the loading severity versus structural deformation behavior. So this is the idea where if you have the damage already told by the nonlinear analysis or predicted by the nonlinear model, for example, you can convert it into any other loss. For example, you can even convert it into number of casualties expected during that earthquake. There are models available which convert your structural analysis results into expected number of casualties or injuries. There are models available which can convert your structural analysis results into downtime or rehabilitation time, for example. You can calculate the rehabilitation cost or the required cost to restore after an earthquake event. And obviously, you can also calculate the other consequences or results of that particular earthquake which you have applied and got that performance of the structure. So the performance-based design can be applied to any type of load. but is typically suitable and targeted for earthquake loads. The concepts which are incorporated are that you check the performance not at one level of an earthquake, but at multiple levels. You use multiple seismic events to check the seismic performance and give the complete picture to the building owner or the decision maker. The most important point is that you should use the nonlinear analysis. The detailed local acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria is a new term for you now. It means that what is the level of a structural seismic demand which is acceptable for you. For example, I say that the IO level, I can have a roof drift or roof displacement, for example, of 2 centimeters. That is acceptable for me. And for life safety, I can have 5 centimeters. So these numbers basically corresponding to different performance levels is your acceptance criteria. For example, if you have done the analysis already, nonlinear analysis, and you get the roof displacement and that came out to be, let's say, 7 centimeter, you should know already using that acceptance criteria that you are already beyond life safety. So the acceptance criteria are the capacities or the you can say the criteria which should be compared with the demand results or the analysis results in order to come up with the seismic performance. So even when you compare this 7 centimeter coming from the analysis with this criteria, then you will come to know that you are beyond life safety, and that will become your structural performance. And that will, you will not do it for one full structure once. It will be done for each element separately. Each structural element or non-structural element will be checked separately after the analysis, and it will be compared with a well-established acceptance criteria, and that criteria should also be agreed upon between the decision maker and the building owner and the architect, all the stakeholders, including structural designer obviously. So that criteria will tell you, will basically convert your structural analysis results into the performance. So these are performance, and these are basically, these numbers will be your acceptance criteria or capacities basically. Capacity means that the structure can withstand a 5 centimeter displacement while having life safety level of damage. So you will know that okay, you have to compare your roof displacement or your any number from the analysis at individual structural level, at column or beam level for example, with that criteria. So that element by element checking after the analysis will give you that okay, this is my overall performance of my building, that your shear walls are going to crack or not, your particular beams or columns are going to yield or not. All of these real-time acceptance criteria will be applied to your structure after the analysis, and you will get the structural performance in a way which will be understandable by all stakeholders, not only by structural engineers. So by hazard I mean the intensity and characteristics of ground shaking, and deterministic, it can be deterministic or it can be probabilistic. The example which I was giving earlier was probabilistic definition of the hazard. For example, I was saying that okay, 10% probability of accidents in 50 years. This is my definition of future earthquake loading, which means that in next 50 years there is only 10% chance that a loading more than this will come. So which means that 10% is my acceptable risk level, you can say. So I'm defining the earthquake ground motion in terms of probabilistic framework. It can be deterministic also, but nowadays it is not used. Deterministic would mean, for example, the magnitude this much earthquake on that much fault. People, by the way, still use the deterministic definition of seismic hazard. But nowadays we mostly use the probabilistic definition in terms of performance-based seismic design. So I mentioned that we used more than one levels of seismic hazard in the PVD methodology. These two levels, or you can say that we check the performance objectives at these two levels explicitly. These two levels are service level assessment and collapse level assessment. So we use a low level of an earthquake called the service level earthquake, SLE, which has a definition of 50% probability of accidents in 30 years. And then we have a collapse level assessment which has a definition of 2% probability of exceedance in 50 years. So which corresponds to a return period of 2500 years. For service level assessment, we use a low level of an earthquake, a frequent earthquake, and that have a return period of around 50 years. So we not only design our structure on the design basis earthquake, then we check the performance of the structure explicitly on two other levels. One lower than design level, which is called the service level assessment, and one more than design level, which is called the collapse level assessment. That is done at the MCE level, maximum considered earthquake level. And the requirements from the structure in terms of performance is different in both of these assessments. So for example, for service level assessment, we have a requirement or expectation that there will be no damage or negligible damage with frequent hazards. So this is a frequent level of an earthquake which can have around 50 years of return period. But here in collapse level assessment, we have a largest earthquake with a return period of 2500 years approximately, and our expectation is that collapse prevention under extreme hazards uh, should be the performance objective. So for example, here we should have IO level and here we should have CP level. So the life safety level will be somewhere in between these two, service level and collapse level, and that is intended for life safety level. So we design for life safety. For example, we can start the design using code level, and we follow the building code, for example, to come up with a starting design, and then we can check explicitly the performance of that design at a low level earthquake and a high level earthquake, and with different expectations at both levels. If the structure follows or fulfills those expectations, then we are good to go. So the performance objectives, for example, for this frequent service level earthquake, the performance objectives can be that the structure should remain essentially elastic with minor damage to structural and non-structural elements. For maximum considered earthquake, the performance objective can be extensive structural damage is allowed, repairs are required and may not be economically feasible, but the structure as a whole should be at collapse prevention level. It should not catastrophically fail. In between these two is the design basis level, and that is the code level. And the code's intention is that the moderate structural damage is allowed and some extensive repairs may also be required, but there should be no loss of life. So the life safety performance objective is intended for building codes. These are some of the concepts which we have already discussed. So both client and engineer must be satisfied. The acceptance criteria, which will convert your analysis results into the building performance, should be agreed upon between the client and the performance-based design engineer. Uh, the hazard must be quantifiable and performance must be quantifiable so that we can explicitly answer the questions asked by the building owner. For building owner, the hazard must be understandable and performance must also be understandable and useful. So this will be a kind of a win-win situation for both engineer and owner, in which they can have a meaningful discussion about the structural expected performance. So all the questions of building owner, will the building be safe, will I be able to use it after the hazard, or what will be the repair cost, for example, can be answered in terms of the amount of yielding, buckling, cracking, some permanent deformations, some other, you can say, demand quantities which can be explicitly calculated using nonlinear analysis. So all the answers can be provided to building owner. But there is an additional thing here, and on that I will end this session, and then we will go to questions and answer session, and that is the peer review. That the performance-based methodology requires a peer review for this assessment, and it should be a third party, and that third party should ensure public safety and realistic performance. So the purpose of that peer review is to enhance structural performance, to improve cost effectiveness, and objectives to be achieved through better structural system selection and use of the advanced design methodologies and tools. And some of the things which are the components of the typical review are, for example, in case of Performance, it can be dynamic response parameters, it can be lateral response, vertical load response, DC ratios in terms of displacement and forces, response irregularity, or some explicit performance evaluation is done or not. In terms of effectiveness, the objectives of a typical peer reviewer will be to use the capacity utilization ratios. These are the ratios which tell that how much capacity of the element or material is used by the demand and how much is the reserve. Reinforcement ratios, their volume, rebar quantities, and the time and accommodation of other constraints. So both of these aspects are checked in the peer review, enhancement of performance and cost effectiveness. So I will end this session here and I will have a question and answer session. In next session, we will discuss that what are some of the key components of performance-based assessment and design, and what are some of the example results you will get if you apply this methodology to new and existing structures.